Thank you all so much. And I'm here on behalf of my co-chair or vice chair, Jacqueline Wagner, as well as several other commissioners of the LAHSA Commission who are present today virtually, and thank them for their leadership and commitment. I also want to thank Supervisor Holly Mitchell and Mayor Garcetti for their engagement, involvement, and passion in dealing with the issue of homelessness. And lastly, as well as our two co-executive directors who have stepped in, Molly Reisman and Christina Dixon, who have been an effective leaders for us in this time, as well as all of the volunteers and also individuals out there who work every single day helping to address the issue of homelessness. We know, as you will see in this count, that it is not one person who solves the problem, it is not one solution that solves the problem, but it is coordination, it is good policy, it is working together for common cause that we can address the issue of homelessness on the streets of Los Angeles. There are lots of good things in the numbers today and some opportunities that we will see in developing policy to ensure that we are helping get everyone housed in Los Angeles. So it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our two co-executive directors, Molly Reisman and Christina Dixon, for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gruhl, Chair Gruhl to be exact. Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Greater Los Angeles Homeless Count announcement. As Commissioner Gruhl noted, my name is Christina Dixon and I serve as an acting co-executive director and chief financial and administration officer here at LAHSA. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today, along with my colleague Molly Reisman, about the results of the 2022 Homeless Count. Next slide. The homeless count is required by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. As the lead agency in the Los Angeles Continuum of Care, LAHSA is responsible for coordinating the point-in-time count for most of Los Angeles County. The LA Continuum of Care includes all of LA County except for Glendale, Long Beach, and Pasadena. These jurisdictions conduct separate counts and add their totals to the LA Continuum for the final county-wide number. This is a regional tool that is best utilized as a snapshot of the issue in Los Angeles County at a point in time, which helps us inform comprehensive policy and direct resources in response to the most emergent crisis of our time. It is important to lift up that the people behind the numbers we are sharing with you this afternoon are our neighbors, coworkers, employees, friends, and loved ones, a sentiment that we cannot lose sight of throughout this process. In LA County, we have one of the most robust, people-powered rehousing systems in the nation. And the people who make this system work are building a Los Angeles where everyone has a place to call home. In the last 5 years, these dedicated public servants coordinated an end to homelessness for over 84,000 Angelenos. Day in and day out, they are connecting our neighbors to care, recovery, homes, and they are saving lives. Today, we began with a few stories of individuals who experienced homelessness and have found a place to call home. We will begin with Pamela, who fell into homelessness while battling a disability and addiction. She was uplifted and made her way to housing through community support and a willingness to help others. She now works as a vocational case manager, helping others stay housed and become self-sustained. Then there's Juliana, who was a runaway emancipated youth that escaped trauma. Today, she connects landlords and property managers in East Hollywood and the San Gabriel Valley with formerly unhoused residents who are rebuilding their lives through the supportive services that she and her team provide. Pamela and Juliana are a few of the people driving our rehousing system. Their stories are examples of the successes that are happening every day across LA County. We thank them for sharing their experiences and look forward to continuing the work that will bring more tales of success in the days to come. To do that, our system needs to overcome the results of decades of poor policy decisions that drive this humanitarian crisis. The new strategic direction that LAHSA recently rolled out is helping to make progress every day to help more individuals get connected to housing options. As the LA area begins to expand its housing supply, the rehousing system, which is made up of LAHSA, the county, city, and community partners, help Angelenos whom the system has failed by rebuilding trust and giving everyone hope with every connection to a safe place to call home, an effort that has been deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. What cannot be denied is that the pandemic has had a profound effect on homelessness. Investments from our government partners made the rehousing system work better. In the early days of the pandemic, the federal, state, and local governments came together under the shared goal of placing as many of our COVID-vulnerable unhoused neighbors into hotel rooms as a part of Project Room Key. As a shelter program that offered each individual their own room, Project Room Key provided shelter to over 10,500 people, of which over 40% were placed into permanent housing. There is no mistake that the unprecedented shared vision and political will put forth during the pandemic shows what we can do together to address this crisis. At the same time, the pandemic presented unique challenges that needed to be overcome as we served our unhoused neighbors. Overall, the 2022 count sheds light on what is working while also highlighting the problems that persist despite our coordinated efforts. As we dive into the numbers, we will lift up what is working and also highlight the challenges that remain. In the second half of the presentation, my colleague Molly will walk you through how we overcome these challenges with some of the efforts currently underway to address homelessness across LA County. This year, we estimate that 69,144 people are experiencing homelessness on any given night in LA County, a 4.1% increase from 2020. As a reminder, LAHSA did not conduct a homeless count in 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the city of Los Angeles, we estimate that 41,980 people experience homelessness on any given night, a 2% increase from 2020. We know the numbers may surprise you. In a few minutes, we will dive deeper into what the data is telling us about this increase. Since we did not conduct a homeless count in 2021, we believe that it is prudent to make a comparison of the increase in individuals experiencing homelessness between the results of the counts conducted between 2020 through 2022 and the results of the counts conducted between 2018 through 2020. For context, in the 2 years before 2020, the 2020 count, LA County saw a 25.9% rise, and the city of LA's count rose 32% in the number of people experiencing homelessness. Before we move on, we want to take a moment to reiterate that the homeless count is a number taken at a particular point in time, traditionally in January. This year, the count was conducted in late February. While it is too soon to know what this year's count results will mean long-term, the numbers are suggesting that there's a flattening of the curve, meaning the percent increase of people experiencing homelessness is shrinking over time. What the results can also reflect is the effects the winter Omicron surge had on the ability to conduct homeless count, whereby it made it harder to count youth and families. These two populations combined to make up approximately 10% of the total homeless count. We will now take a look at how homelessness is spread across the region. Generally speaking, we did not see a lot of movement across SPAs in this year's count. There are obvious exceptions, whereby in SPA 5, we saw a 23% decrease in people experiencing homelessness, while SPA 6 and 8, we saw increases. Last year, LAHSA and our community partners made 21,213 permanent housing placements. We have made over 84,000 placements in the past 5 years, which is enough to fill Dodger Stadium 1.5 times. However, the growth in homeless count tells us people are still falling into the homelessness faster than our system can move them out, due in large part to the fact that housing remains unaffordable for many Angelenos. Across LA County, more people are in shelter than ever before, which is something to be celebrated. Shelter is a necessary and vital part of our system because bringing people inside protects them from the destructive effects on their health and safety that comes from experiencing unsheltered homelessness. LA County's shelter population increased by 12% to 20,596 individuals, or about 30% of the people experiencing homelessness on any given night. LA has dramatically increased its investments in shelter beds. However, our numbers do not reflect full utilization. Due to the Omicron surge during the homeless count, the need for social distancing forced us to decompress or reduce the number of beds available in our shelter system. This resulted in the loss of a significant percentage of beds, whereby many shelters had to hold beds offline, or beds were left empty with sites being closed due to quarantine, thus making the point-in-time count more challenging. The city of Los Angeles also saw an 8.7% increase in sheltered individuals, indicating a rise to 13,522 people in shelter. The city of LA also saw a 1.4% drop in the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. The expansion in shelter was made possible by the substantial increase in shelter options over the past several years, led by the City of LA and other cities across the county. Our community's collective investments in shelter, including programs like A Bridge Home, Tiny Homes, Project Home Key, and Project Room Key, led to an overall 62% increase in shelter beds from 2019 through 2022. My apologies. However, our shelter system was still experiencing decompression back in February to ensure social distancing, which limited the number of people our system could bring inside. With that being said, there is more hard work ahead, as thousands of our neighbors still live on the streets, and our community must do more to ensure people living in shelter find a permanent home. Next slide. We know the numbers we have talked about so far may surprise you, and that it feels like the increase in homelessness should be larger than ever. The numbers from this year's homeless count are telling us that there was a 17% increase in tents, vehicles, and makeshift shelters on our streets and sidewalks from 2020. However, at the same time, LA County's unsheltered population rose by 1%. For context, what we are seeing is a significant increase in the evidence of homelessness while not seeing a corresponding increase in our unsheltered neighbors. You may be wondering, so how do we explain that? Well, during the early days of the pandemic, our communities followed CDC guidance to prevent the spread of the virus by pausing encampment cleanups. This allowed our unsheltered neighbors to shelter in place while living outside. Without the cleanups, the number of tents, vehicles, and makeshift shelters increased by 17%. Meanwhile, our shelter options increased, as did the efforts to move people into them. As a result, more people moved inside to shelter, and some left tents and belongings behind in encampments. As the region began to reopen, in the months since the homeless count, the City of LA, county, and independent cities have increased encampment cleanups, and most are using LAHSA's best practices to do it the right way. Before we move on, we need to note that our system is in a unique situation. During the pandemic, one-time federal pandemic assistance and policies helped keep people in their homes and expanded shelter. However, many of the policies and funding sources that made an impact are now ending, leaving households unsure if they will be able to keep their homes and less resources for a rehousing system to respond. Because homelessness is a lagging indicator, it is possible that future homeless counts could show significant increases. Only time will tell what COVID-19's true effect is on our neighbors on the edge of experiencing homelessness. The winter Omicron variant spike led to fewer family and transition-age youth surveys being collected. Additionally, as it was previously noted, COVID made it harder to count youth and families this year, which make up around 10% of the count. The youth count was particularly challenging as many youth access centers were closed during the Omicron surge. This led to a lower number of surveys completed than in previous years. While we were not able to fully see the impacts of the pandemic on our most vulnerable youth and families, we appreciate that homelessness is the tip of the iceberg for far too many youth and families, and they do not have a stable place to call home in LA. This year's count revealed that 39.5% of our unhoused neighbors report experiencing serious mental illness and substance abuse, which is lower than the national average reported by HUD. That also means that 60.5% of our unhoused neighbors do not report experiencing a serious mental illness or substance abuse disorder. COVID exacerbated mental illness and substance use among the housed and unhoused alike. However, overdoses affected the unhoused drastically more. People experiencing homelessness are 35 times more likely to overdose than someone housed, with overdoses amongst LA's unhoused increasing by 80% in 2021, driven by the rise of fentanyl use and economic dislocation. Everyone at LAHSA and our colleagues at every organization dedicated to addressing homelessness are heartbroken at the increased loss of life due to the substance abuse on our streets. Our community needs more resources dedicated to substance use disorders and mental health treatment to ensure that our most vulnerable neighbors have the opportunity to secure stable housing and thrive in our communities. Over the last 2 years, LAHSA and our partners were able to bring inside to shelter over 4,000 people battling addiction and mental illness. With the launch of Project Room Key, there was a commitment to bring as many of our vulnerable neighbors inside as possible, and that is exactly what happened. With Project Room Key and Project Home Key being a model of shelter with a private room, it proved to be very successful at getting our most vulnerable neighbors inside. We cannot understate that the positive impact that the coordinated efforts of our federal, state, and local partners had on the system that we take from this year's homeless count. We are also grateful for the critical life-saving work of our county partners to address this tragedy. They are shifting tactics to focus on our rehousing system on those with the most serious and complex behavioral health issues who have been on the streets for at least 6 months. We need to build on the success of Project Home Key and Project Room Key and redouble our efforts to bring indoors our most vulnerable neighbors by decreasing any barriers to accessing shelter. Next slide. Now we will take a look at the demographic data. As a part of the homeless count, we gather data via demographic survey. Please note that the numbers reflected on the slide is only for the LACOC because Glendale, Long Beach, and Pasadena conduct their own homeless count, and it is not possible for us to include their numbers in our demographic and subpopulation data. There is some good news to report as it relates to veterans experiencing homelessness, where we saw a decrease of 6.1% from 2020. This success is getting more veterans housed is a testament to the outstanding work of our colleagues at the VA. The number of women experiencing homelessness increased by 2.4%, while seniors experiencing homelessness grew by 6.5%. And people experiencing chronic homelessness grew by 10.2%. For more information about these subpopulations, visit the Homeless Count press release page on our website. As we turn our attention to race and ethnicity, we find that Black people remain overrepresented among our unhoused neighbors. Black people make up 30% of the unhoused, but are only 9% of the county population. There is no doubt that past racist government policies and housing discrimination continue to have an impact on who and how many people experience homelessness in our county. To help right past wrongs, LAHSA is centering racial equity in all of our work, which is the only way we can overcome the prejudicial policies of the past. We at LAHSA encourage all of our partners to take the steps necessary to ensure our policies and programs do everything they can to help fix this massive imbalance. When we take a closer look at the overall racial demographics, we are seeing that 25.8% more people experiencing homelessness identify as Latino. Latinos are the largest demographic group in our region, representing 49% of LA County, and now 44% of people experiencing homelessness. LAHSA is committed to bringing our expertise in addressing racial equity forward to have an increased focus on Latino homelessness in the coming year. We are working closely with the Office of Immigrant Affairs on how to address undocumented homelessness, and we'll be launching a work group focused on Latino homelessness. This concludes our snapshot into what homelessness looks like in LA County on any given night. I will now turn the presentation over to my colleague Molly Reisman, who will walk you through the solutions that LAHSA and our partners at the city and county are working on to overcome those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning. If there's one thing you take away from these results, we want you to see how policy and investments matter. Tenant protections like eviction moratoriums and rental assistance implemented by the county and city of LA helped people stay in their homes and not fall into homelessness during the pandemic. The county and cities across the region are expanding rent stabilization and tenant protections to ensure people can continue to pay their rents and stay in their homes. Angelenos taxed themselves to invest in helping our unhoused neighbors. That led to unprecedented investments in shelter, housing, and services through Proposition HHH and Measure H. This means that more people experiencing homelessness have safe places to sleep, are getting connected to help, and are exiting homelessness. However, we're at a precarious moment. Many of the policies and investments that prevented COVID from driving more households into homelessness have or will end soon. We need to learn from these policies and investments and make them ongoing, such as making investments in rental assistance and emergency financial assistance ongoing. Homelessness in LA is a crisis decades in the making. Our collective movement is making progress every day, and we can in fact see it. So let's take a closer look. Next slide. Thank you. The City of LA approved more affordable housing in the past 5 years than in the previous 30 years. Proposition HHH will exceed its goal of creating 10,000 new affordable and supportive homes. I want to pause and say thank you to the voters of LA for this tremendous investment in bringing our unhoused neighbors home. In addition to building affordable housing, our region is innovating with strategies like Project Home Key, where we buy existing buildings to provide supportive housing, We're also learning how to support people experiencing homelessness and sharing apartments as a strategy to get off the streets. Finally, a number of homeless service providers are experimenting with master leasing. We are taking an all-hands-on-deck approach to using every strategy possible to help people exit homelessness in this incredibly tight rental market. Led by the City of LA and other cities across the county, our LACOC shelter capacity has increased 62% since 2019. We went from roughly 15,000 beds available on any given night in 2019 to over 25,000 in 2022. Shelter is not a long-term solution, but bringing our neighbors inside saves lives and it places them on a path out of homelessness. We've talked a little bit about how this crisis is the result of bad, often racially discriminatory policies. I want to give some examples here from our national and local history. Things like housing discrimination, policies that withheld wealth, land, and home ownership from people of color, mass incarceration, and inadequate support for people as they leave prison or jails, hospitals, foster care, or even the military. Over the years, downzoning and restricting growth slowed down LA's housing supply. As a result, housing prices skyrocketed and income stagnated, and the result was that it deprived thousands of people of access to affordable homes. People and policies created this crisis, and people and policies can end it. So as we consider what this year's homeless count data tells us, let's take the opportunity to make the changes we need to successfully address homelessness in LA County. Focusing on the root causes of homelessness will show us how we can end this crisis. This is how we bring all of our unhoused neighbors home. LAHSA and our community partners are making big strategic policy changes right now. Our goal, to give you the short version, is to reduce unsheltered homelessness by moving people from shelter to housing faster. The pandemic allowed us to innovate with models like Project Room Key and Project Home Key. We're now applying those innovations and lessons learned to our entire rehousing system. Individual cities in LA County can help us achieve our goals by coordinating more effectively. We have a huge opportunity to use our current resources to help even more people. Together, we can achieve our goal of reducing unsheltered homelessness over the next 3 years. And there are examples we can look to. Houston reduced homelessness by defining shared strategic goals across government entities and focusing on creating affordable housing. Strategic goals start with established metrics. We have a partnership with LA County, the city, and California Policy Lab to develop a set of shared metrics to track our progress. This is a critical step towards increasing coordination and accountability, and stay tuned because we'll be releasing those metrics at the end of September. Earlier, we reported that from 2019 to 2022, the LA region's shelter capacity increased by 62%, but resources for permanent housing programs did not keep pace. While the growth of our shelter system is a tremendous achievement, we need to ensure that investments in supportive housing and permanent housing programs keep pace so everyone who goes into shelter has a pathway out of homelessness. During last year's housing inventory count, we shared that to quickly and efficiently move our unhoused neighbors into housing, we need to have a 5-to-1 permanent housing to shelter ratio. Our system today is closer to a 1-to-1 ratio. We need to continue to expand affordable and permanent housing strategies like emergency housing vouchers, affordable housing trust funds, Project Home Key, master leasing, shared housing, landlords partnering with the lease-up program, as well as specialty housing for those who are most vulnerable, like seniors and those with serious mental illness. We move people into housing only when there's housing available, so adding more affordable housing is our best move as a region to address homelessness. That's not all that's improving in our system. LA County's homeless initiative is making changes to rehouse our neighbors faster and expand homelessness prevention. We often say that the homeless services system is the safety net of last resort, that if you're here, you've already been failed by another safety net or multiple safety nets. So how do we strengthen those safety nets? By maximizing the capacity of healthcare and social services. For example, we can use data to predict and prevent homelessness. We can keep people in their homes by helping those who are at risk of falling into homelessness to pay their rent. And we can improve support for people exiting foster care, jails, county hospitals, and prevent them from ever becoming homeless. The biggest factor driving homelessness is that housing is unaffordable for just about everyone. To fix this, we need to increase our housing supply across the county by adding more than 800,000 units over the next 8 years, and we need a particular focus on affordable housing. Policymakers at every level need to make significant policy changes if we're going to step up the pace of production. Cities have unique powers to site property. There's a lot that can be done to streamline the process of building and converting housing and to maximize all possible funding sources. Having more housing means that when an encampment is cleared, cities can partner to help get people into shelters and support people to move from shelters into a home of their own, such as supportive housing or Project Home Key. We've provided a lot of information today about homelessness in the county during the point in time count. So let's pull back so we can leave you with some takeaways. First, homelessness is rising slower than it did in previous years. Second, there are more tents, cars, etc. that indicate visible homelessness on the streets, but there are actually fewer people occupying each of these. Third, crucial policy and investments prevented COVID from making homelessness much, much worse during the pandemic. Fourth, our rehousing system houses enough people to end homelessness in LA County in 3 to 4 years, but the number of people falling into homelessness outpaces our ability to house them. Fifth, investment in mental health and substance use disorder treatment services and beds is badly needed. Sixth, we've significantly increased the number of people in shelter, which saves lives and helps them exit homelessness. Seventh, Black people are still overrepresented among people experiencing homelessness, but we did see a decrease in 2022. The number of Latinos experiencing homelessness has grown considerably over the last 2 years. And finally, with the economic support from state and federal government programs to address the effects of COVID-19 coming to an end, our residents and our rehousing system are at a very precarious moment. As the pandemic-era economic programs end, too many households are on the verge of homelessness. At the same time, our rehousing system will have less resources to respond to these households, as one-time investments in rehousing end as well. That said, this year's homeless count gives us hope that collaboration, good policy decisions, and investments can make this crisis better. We'll only solve this together, so here's how you can help. You can advocate to support policies to create housing. You can say yes to housing in every community, and you can get involved with the United Way's Everyone In campaign. If you want to volunteer, there are many ways. LAHSA's Get Involved page can connect you with local service providers. Many neighborhoods have self-organized groups like Neighbors for Neighbors LA, Hollywood Forward, SELA, K-Town for All, or LA Can. You can vote for candidates and propositions that address the root causes of homelessness. If you are a property owner, you can help expand the housing supply and create rental housing available to people experiencing homelessness, such as partnering with the Lease Up program or with your local service provider. If you're an employer, you can hire formerly homeless applicants. And of course, we would love for everyone to volunteer for the 2023 homeless count in January. People experiencing homelessness are our loved ones. They're our neighbors, our parents, our siblings, our children, and our employees. We all see rents rising. We have to work together to create a safety net and a strong community that's there for people who lose their homes. LAHSA is grateful for the tens of thousands of frontline staff and volunteers who work tirelessly every day to create strong community and bring our unhoused neighbors home. Learn more about some of their stories at our new website, Rehousing LA. I know we have some of them in the room you'll get to meet later as well. And with that, that concludes the homeless count presentation. We do have some additional remarks as well.
I want to just give you some additional highlights from the presentation that you saw. So the 4% increase in this year's homeless count was significantly less compared to the 25.9% increase in LA County from 2018 to 2020. That flattening of the curve shows us what can happen when all stakeholders unite to keep people in their homes and help our unhoused neighbors find a permanent home. LAHSA has been advocating for strengthening the social safety net for years, understanding that doing so would help more of our neighbors and friends keep their homes. During the pandemic, we saw that happen. We believe tenant protections and rental assistance are essential in keeping this year's increase reasonably low. During the pandemic, we also saw an unprecedented alignment of funding and political will around bringing people inside quickly to reduce the spread of COVID-19. That alignment was most effective through Project Roomkey. Over the course of the program, Project Roomkey offered over 10,500 people a hotel room to stay in. As the program began winding down, we devised a plan to use time-limited subsidies and vouchers that ended homelessness for over 40% of Project Roomkey participants. We can continue that progress with Project Homekey. We thank Mayor Garcetti, my apologies, Board Chair Mitchell, the other decision makers at the city and county, the governor, and the federal government for believing in these investments and helping thousands of people find a place to call home. I will now turn it over to my colleague Molly Reisman for further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. First off, I just want to thank CRCD. You're going to get to hear from Jose. This is a very important historic building, so I hope all of our friends in the media will stick around, tour the building, see the amazing work that's done here, and we're very grateful to CRCD. I'd like to join Christina in praising the actions of the mayor, the board chair, the city council, the board of supervisors, and our independent cities who stood up and took action to help so many of our unhoused neighbors come home. The 12% increase in our countywide sheltered population and the corresponding 9% increase in LA City directly result from years of investment in our shelter system. We look forward to working with you on programs like Project Homekey to keep that progress going. We know that shelter saves lives, but homelessness is not ended until each of our unhoused neighbors has a place to call home. We need to take action to increase the supply of affordable and supportive housing. As we said during the presentation, our community needs over 800,000 units of housing over the next 8 years to make up our housing gap. The City of LA is certainly doing its part with Proposition HHH on track to exceed its goal of bringing 10,000 supportive and affordable housing homes online. And the county has also dramatically expanded investment in affordable and supportive housing as well. We also applaud independent cities who are working towards this goal. As we shared in the presentation, we need to build housing and we need to keep people from falling into homelessness. We also applaud all of our partners who enacted tenant protections and helped their constituents not fall behind on rent during the pandemic. The count shows that tenant protections are a powerful tool in preventing homelessness. As we said, people and policies created this crisis, and people and policies can solve it. Speaking of people working to solve this crisis, I want to acknowledge Pamela, if you can raise your hand. Thank you, Pamela, for your amazing work. And Juliana, if you can also raise your hand, from our Rehousing LA campaign who joined us today. Thank you for your service to our unhoused neighbors. Albert Einstein said that in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. Throughout the pandemic, our community took steps necessary to help those on the edge of homelessness. And our unhoused neighbors and this year's homeless count tell us we're on the right path, but at a precarious moment. We at LAHSA look forward to working with all of our partners to keep this momentum going. I would now like to introduce Supervisor Holly Mitchell, Chair of the Board of Supervisors.
Good morning. I spent my summers at, I'm a native Angelino, at the Y, learning to swim at the Y on Vernon. So it's a pleasure for me to be here at this historic Y in the heart of our city. We're going out of order a bit because our mayor is in transit. And so thank you all. And on behalf of the board, I really want to, again, extend my deep gratitude to all of our partners. And let me say that leadership matters. And so I want to thank both Christina and Molly, Wendy, LAHSA board chair, for stepping in and stepping out in a time when we needed you the most, absolutely. And as you both mentioned, to all of the outreach workers across this county for your both physically and emotionally demanding work each and every day. You did what it takes to make this count happen in the middle of an international public health pandemic. That should not be lost on any of us. But the work you did to create the data that we now have the opportunity to review and see, and as a policymaker use to make critical policy decisions, is very important to our unhoused residents and important to the integrity of policymaking. And so again, I want to thank you. You know, from my perspective, as I listen to the presentation, I think it's important that we all acknowledge the fact that what we are hearing and learning today in these numbers, it really is telling a story, not a simple story, a very complex, layered, painful, difficult story. It's a story where we are fiercely working across the region to provide homes and services for everyone. It's a story, as your chart talked about, the historic policy decisions that led us to today, led us to our current rate of homelessness. I would add to those very important points of reference other things like welfare reform and other policy decisions where when we have a tough economy, elected bodies at every level of government restrict funding and services to people who need it the most. When the economy has tanked, that is not the time to reduce funding to entitlement programs. And we've done that time after time. Last year, between the city and county of LA, you saw the numbers in terms of the number of people we permanently house, more than any other city or county did across the United States. That's significantly important. And for me, what we must not lose sight of, the role we have to continue to play to prevent people from losing their housing. Because I believe that we could get to a functional zero homelessness number reasonably within 5 years if we do both build, prevent people from losing their housing, and then again provide services to people who need it. Again, this complex layered story includes us at the county, along with our city partners, in increasing our shelter bed capacity by 57%. This is a story of providing homes, of transforming lives, of tens of thousands of people who have currently received shelter care. It was important for me to stop and pause and talk about what we have done as we then begin to talk about what we must continue to do in terms of housing the people that we've learned about today. I represent the 2nd Supervisorial District. We saw the SPA breakdown, and while it's to some degree a relief given the public health pandemic we all experienced, that we saw that the numbers really showed a single-digit increase, that's not equitable across the county. And so acknowledging that Black and brown people are disproportionately represented, continue to be in our unhoused, that there are some communities that suffer and are home to our unhoused at higher rates than others, can't be lost. That's what makes this story complex and difficult and challenging. We've got to acknowledge those inequities as we build back stronger and back better for the county. And from my perspective, this data helps us shape the future of our story by allowing us to pinpoint interventions and match them to the areas of greatest need. I want to talk very briefly about the kind of investment the county has done, because I have to tell you, I hear it sometime from some of you. I hear it from my own neighbors when I drag the trash cans to the curb on Friday mornings. You know, what's government doing? You're not doing enough. And I think my sense is all of us can and must do more. From individual private residents of the county to government to philanthropy, all of it, private sector, all of us can and must. There is room for improvement. But I have to acknowledge the kind of resources, unprecedented resources, that we have identified and used in recent years. The Board of Supervisors unanimously approved a $527 million budget for our homeless initiative. And over the past just 2 years, in the face of the pandemic, We invested over $115 million in rental subsidies, move-in assistance, and $150 million in interim housing to fund thousands of beds. Of that top line number, 527, $132 million was allocated in supportive housing for over 11,000 households, $89 million in rapid rehousing to help individuals and families get on their feet quickly, and $39 million for street outreach. I'm sure you saw that front page, top of the fold article in yesterday's LA Times that talked about the psychiatric outreach teams who are going to RV to RV, tent to tent, really having direct conversations and providing the important kind of support people need to be successful once housed. We've also approved $20 million to fund our cities and council of governments to operationalize their own interim sites. Additionally, with critical support from the state of California, we allocated their investment of $850 million in Project Room Key and Project Home Key sites, helping an additional 10,000 unhoused vulnerable people into space. The county has additionally provided $69 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for permanent supportive housing construction. We saw that important diagram you showed, that for every shelter bed, how many permanent supportive housing bed options we have to build in LA County. For every shelter bed, we need 5 permanent supportive housing beds. So I don't have the luxury as a policymaker to direct all of our funding in one area. We have to fund in all of these areas to really make a significant difference. Again, the county has dedicated an additional $113 million over the last year to the city of LA to bring about 6,700 interim beds to house older adults and individuals most at risk, living within 500 feet of a freeway, under an overpass. I am proud to be on a board of supervisors that has a housing first policy. I carried the housing first legislation when I was a state legislator, and that means that we need appropriate housing options with supportive services. I think that all of us really have a responsibility to make sure that we thoroughly digest the data that was shared to us. Thank you for the helpful high-level PowerPoint, but we all have to dig deeper to really internalize these numbers so we understand kind of the nuances, that this is not a cookie cutter approach, it's not a black or white issue. As I said, this story is layered, it's historic, and I think we have to learn from past policy practices so we don't repeat them again. That's what I intend to do as a policymaker, and I hope all of you as members of the media will help us tell that story. To see the Dodger Stadium example and recognize how many people we have housed should not be lost on all of us. I'm not resting on those laurels, but it should not be lost on all of us, the number of people so far that we've been able to house, because that shows that we have a pathway, we have a process, we have collaborative relationships that we have utilized in a positive, productive way, that we can continue to move forward to create housing for the people that this year's point in time count identified as vulnerable and in need of services from all of us as LA County residents. Thank you very much for the opportunity to hear your data and present. And I will assume it will give me the pleasure, I will be given the pleasure and honor of presenting to you the mayor of this great city of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti. Thank you, I appreciate you. I'm great.
Good. Thank you so much, Supervisor. There was a time when I think city and county, back when LAHSA was created, was all about open warfare with each other and blame. And I have to say, as I come to the last 93 days, but who's counting, of my time as mayor, what a joy it has been to serve alongside you in both the incarnation at the state level, but especially closer here at the county level, where it feels like friends who don't have boundaries and borders, policy and personally, between. So thank you. And thank you, Molly and Christina, for the exceptional work stepping into one of the hottest seats in America at a moment of transition and importance, for just bringing your individual and collective excellence and the excellence of LAHSA's team, especially those who work in the rehousing system, Juliana and Pamela and everybody who's really the incarnation of this really difficult work. When people say end homelessness, you spend a day trying to engage with, You spend a week trying to house, a month trying to turn around, or a year staying with somebody, you realize how infinite each person is and how deep that work is, and we really appreciate you. And Wendy Gruhl, my dear friend and great leader, who also, you get paid a lot as a LAHSA commissioner, it's exactly $0, but who has stepped into, I knew from her work with Mayor Bradley and the work that we were able to do together on the city council was the best person I could find in this city to help lead this, and has been there for so many great moments and tough moments, and thank you for your leadership as well. And thank you to the members of the press for being here. It's always, a tough day to cover, right? Because it's easy just to say, okay, here are the numbers. And there's still a lot of numbers that are out there. There's still too many people. And I should always say, because I forget to do this sometimes, that what we see out there is unacceptable. These numbers are way too high. No city should live with this. No community should live with this. And we have to be fueled by that impatience and that passion to never accept what we see. Those of us who deal with the system and who legislate the system and who fund the system often get lost in the, let me tell you all the great stuff that's happening, and I will, because it's really important not to lose sight of that. But if you don't start from a place of moral outrage, you're not being honest, you're not being human. And I want every constituent out there to know the supervisor and I, our colleagues, have that same sense as Angelenos, as Southern Californians, of just disgust for what we see on the street. Not the people, but the conditions. And we have to rehumanize who they are and remember what our mission is together. The hard work of ending homelessness ends with homes, and it ends also with understanding that homelessness is not just about homelessness. It's about much, much more. It is about systems that have too often failed and decades of disinvestment in the number of housing units we built, a mental health care system we let collapse, and no national standards or priorities on these things when we should have a right to these at the national level. But I feel more optimistic than I've ever felt before, even if I'm more exhausted than I've ever been. The good news here this count is that, and this is familiar language having lived through a pandemic, is we finally feel like we've flattened the curve. Flattening the curve is different than reducing it, and that's the next step. But to not see, when we last did this count, if we looked at the 2 years before that, a 32% increase, and now to look at least in the city of LA, about 1.5% increase, and the county similar. And if you look at the unsheltered number, which to me was the most encouraging, the unsheltered number for the last 2 years we counted had also gone up by 1/3, and in the city of LA, it's down by 1%. Nothing to celebrate or have a party about, but to have that curve flattened, and even the beginning, and this is, remember, from February. It's really important to remember when these numbers happen. We had a COVID surge. Much of our shelters had to decompress, which is a fancy way of saying half the number of people could be in them or less. So if we actually had an honest count today, and I think all of us want to have a quicker count, part of the requirements of this make it so complicated, we've got to figure out a way to have a day-to-day sense of where homelessness is. I know our policy makers and our providers would like that, but that we're here 9 months or 8 months later, we're not giving you an accurate picture of today. And I know how many ribbon cuttings we've been at. I know how many recompressions of our shelter beds we've had. I'm confident those numbers are even lower than what we see here today. But we all changed in the 2 years during a global pandemic, when we had public health advice not to touch anyone on the street, and we had a lot of people unable to go do the work, though there were heroes doing this outreach and medical help and mental health help every single day of the pandemic, and I want to thank those first responders who were out there. The fact that we did not experience a rise in homelessness anywhere near those 2 years means this curve has been flattened. And those, I think, are from the alignment of federal, state, county, and city resources in a way that I've never witnessed before. And let me just bear witness to that. We've got a long way to go, and we have to make sure it wasn't just an accident of a pandemic where we figured out a way to come together. This should be the new normal. But we made big investments. When we told people to vote for things like an HHH, we went from 2 years ago opening about 300 units to this year over 2,000. Next year, over 2,000 more. And I would say for my successor and for the voters of Los Angeles, we have to figure out a way to make sure we don't go off a cliff in the funding. The voters of the county with H go off a cliff when that decade ends, because that's really important. A lot of people say, well, this money is being spent and still there's homelessness. That's like saying, well, my car has a problem, we need to fix it. Let's junk the car and start walking. No, the car is finally on a highway. It's finally moving, and we have to make sure we're fine-tuning it and adding more fuel to that car, not somehow taking it apart. And many of these investments started long before COVID-19. Working with the county, we've brought over 130,000 people home. That should have housed every unhoused person many times over, which gets to the heart of prevention and why prevention has to be a continuing focus. A little bit of rent assistance, like we were able to do during the pandemic, goes a long way to making sure new people don't become unhoused. Making sure that we figure out short-term solutions that are cheaper than long-term solutions that require us to spend millions of dollars sometimes on individuals and families. As a city, we tried to see if we could build a handful and then 15 bridge home sites. We're now more than double that. And during the pandemic, we opened 20 of them, thanks to workers who showed up every single day to make that happen. We acquired 20 new properties through Home Key and this governor and this legislature's leadership. And we have 15 more coming online, 35 buildings. When people say build faster, how about if we just buy it and we have it? That's pretty fast. And those projects comprise nearly 6,000 new beds as well. And in the nearly 7 months, excuse me, I said 8 or 9, since the pit count took place, the city has created 300 new interim housing beds, opened close to more than 500 of those 2,000 permanent supportive housing units that will open this year. And as I said, we'll open, actually it was 500 already, 1,900 more just in the last 5 months of this year are coming. 1,900. That's unprecedented. I think when we were on the council, we'd be lucky if we had 1,900 in a decade. We're going to do that in about 4 or 5 months. But homes and homelessness, and we've been building homes supportive and affordable. In the last 2 years, the city has added approximately 1,600 units of permanent supportive housing, but our annual production is up, if you want a percentage, by 600%, from 300 a year to that 2,000 plus that I mentioned. 27 HHH properties with 1,700 homes are ready for occupancy and operation. 98 more. It's a staggering number. Almost 100 other buildings are going to come online. As I said, where it used to be maybe 1 a quarter, I'm going to 1 a week. We'll be able to offer wraparound supportive services in those thanks to the county, thanks to city money that's put forward, and state money too. And we want the state to continue giving us flexible money, because don't tell us to buy things and then we'll have to shut them down when we don't have the services, and you wonder why people are hitting the streets again. But HHH isn't the only investment we've made. Since Tom Bradley first talked about it in the late 1970s, we finally passed a linkage fee, which is a fancy way of saying when people build luxury housing, they have to pay a fee to make sure that we can build affordable housing as well, and housing for people who are unhoused. It was the first locally generated permanent source of funding for housing since the end of redevelopment funds, and it's generated $73 million and counting already. We think it'll generate about $100 million a year. So our investment in bringing our neighbors home has doubled. It's redoubled year after year. In fact, our city budget on homelessness went to, and we had to stretch to say this, about $10 million a year when I started, to $1.16 billion. That's a more than 100-fold increase. And so I think the movement we're seeing is the result of that. It's taken a lot to flatten this curve, and it's going to take a lot more to bring that curve down. That's how we make up for decades of disinvestment. That's how we make up for the failure of systems that we let fall apart. It gives me great hope to know, for instance, with the county, with the city paying for the drivers, them paying for the clinicians, our 911 system taking the calls in, that all those calls for mental health emergencies that were happening in the city of LA that used to go to a police officer or a firefighter who did their best, and we trained them as best we could in mental health, but weren't mental health professionals, and 98% of the time didn't have a resolution that had to do with mental health, now are 70% plus being treated on the street or in actual mental health facilities when people make those calls. We have 4 to start, but we can't have enough of those together. When people see that trauma on the street, and when unhoused people are traumatized, it's because they need mental health care. It's because we're not talking about what the methamphetamine do right now to people on the streets, that turn people inwards and into tents. The old methamphetamines that were developed for soldiers to go out into war, this does the opposite to them. And it's causing brain damage to folks and treating folks who have already had untreated mental health. They're self-treating with it. But we need to have, and we can't have too much help from the state and federal authorities on this front as well. So what can we do to keep bending that curve? Supportive housing is our best move, but as the supervisor said, when people have these stupid debates about shelter or housing, services, or outreach teams, it's like yes, 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 and yes. Because people are calling today and deserve something like the man I saw on the street walking in traffic today at Temple and Alvarado. We need help immediately when people are traumatizing and traumatized on the street. But we also need to make sure that when that gets settled, we don't walk away from that individual and that we permanently resolve his situation. So everyone here and everyone is watching. This isn't a Democratic or a Republican issue. I talk all the time with Republican-led cities in this state who are experiencing the same thing. It isn't a universal problem around the country, but about a third of the country faces this. And so I want to end with saying this is a time where we really need to continue to see state leadership. And I want to praise this governor for stepping up, a former mayor, local official who understands. He's been both a supervisor and a mayor, so if you like merge the two of us, you get Gavin Newsom. Is that a scary picture or what? Yeah, exactly. He should be so lucky. But he understands what we go through at that microscopic level, has brought great macroscopic funds as well. But we really need, and I know we have a president who campaigned on and believes in a universal right to housing, but we need to, and we have a couple members of Congress who represent us now who are pushing for it. But we need to say to America, if you want to end homelessness in the great cities of this country, we need to have a universal right to housing the way other countries who have ended it do. We do that with food and food stamps. There isn't a limit to the number of people. It's universal. We do that with Medicaid, which we call Medi-Cal, because nobody should go without health care. But when it comes to housing, you have a 1 in 8 chance in Los Angeles of waiting a very long time and then struggling to find a landlord who will take a voucher that isn't enough money. And 7 out of 8 people, while not all unhoused, everybody who is unhoused is the victim of those policies. And we need the private sector and philanthropy to continue to be not only holding our feet to the fire, but being innovative and supportive of what works. And of course, if you're landlords, help us. We need you. We've got vouchers today. And you know how difficult it is to ask your regular tenants for rent, and everybody skips 1 month or you have to get it late. Once you sign up for a voucher, you get your rent on time every single month. It's actually a great program. We've shortened the amount of time for inspections. We've made it very easy. I know the county's done the same. So if you're looking and listening to this saying, okay, these numbers are still too high, like we all know and feel in our guts, what can I do? Well, if you're a landlord, contact us. Our housing authorities issued over 3,300 vouchers, and they're waiting for you. And we can't wait to have you be a part of the solution. If you're saddened by the rise, as you saw in the statistics, of Latinos who are becoming homeless, I think this is a time and a good opportunity for LAHSA, as we did with Black homelessness, to specifically study Latino homelessness and maybe create an ad hoc committee or study on this as well, so that we can look at some of the challenges in our immigrant community and the Latinos face and control the forces that push that community into homelessness and act and prevent Latino homelessness, which is rising too fast. And I think the city is also actively working on this right to housing framework. We will put as much money as we can. I know the county will too, and the state is struggling to, although the state has a lot more money than either one of us. But the federal government ultimately is, I think, where we need to be. And I'm going to ask voters too to go out there and to support any housing measure. And by the way, I'm not articulating anything on those Prop 26 and 27 ones, which call themselves about homelessness, but are not really. But real solutions for long-term funding to make sure when they come to you, vote yes on them. Because this is going to take our impatience and our patience together. It's going to require us to be able to do this for a decade plus of building enough housing, period, enough affordable housing, enough rental assistance, and enough permanent housing for people unhoused today to get out of this crisis for good. So I think I've hit everything. Finally, let me just thank the volunteers. A lot of people spend a lot of time doing this count. This is done by everyday Angelinos, and we're lucky to have them. By the way, this fall there will be United to House LA on the ballot in the city of LA, which is an opportunity to raise as much as $600, $700, $800 million a year. So in other words, in 2 years you could raise more than HHH if it passes. So I would encourage folks to look at that and vote for it. But the volunteers who counted the folks this past year, thank you. We know we need to do more. I feel good about momentum that we have, and I'm confident the next 2 years we will see not only the flattening of this curve, but the bending down. The question now is how much and how fast. I know there's a lot of Spanish, and I see coming in. Let me say I'll be much, much briefer in Spanish, but I assume some folks, yeah, okay. Brevemente también. En febrero, gracias a los voluntarios de esta ciudad, voluntarios contaron 41,980 personas sin hogar en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Un incremento de 1.7%, pero fue una reducción de 1.2% de la gente sin refugio. Este es progreso, pero necesitamos hacer más. La diferencia en que durante la pandemia alineamos esfuerzo como nunca antes con el gobierno federal, estatal, el condado y las ciudades para hacer grandes inversiones en vivienda, en refugios, en ayuda de emergencia. Y ahora le estamos proporcionando un techo a 62% más gente en el condado, y en nuestra ciudad hemos construido 10 comunidades de casas pequeñas. Abrimos 20 sitios de Bridge Home, refugios. Adquirimos 20 propiedades con HomeKey y tenemos 15 más por venir con HomeKey 2. Todo esto nos da un total de 6,000 nuevos techos. Pero necesitamos construir más y más rápidamente también. No podemos parar aquí. Gracias al condado, gobernador Newsom y los fondos federales, porque este progreso finalmente a tener un aumento en los indigentes en la ciudad de Los Ángeles es maravilloso. Pero la condición en las calles de Los Ángeles no es aceptable para las comunidades, para nuestros vecinos, y necesitamos hacer más. Hoy sabemos lo siguiente: podemos darles un hogar y también podemos prevenir las causas de la indigencia. A trabajar se ha dicho. Thank you very much.
We are available if there are any media questions.
Can someone shed some light on the veterans? That was like a little highlight. Shed a little more light on that.
Yes, veteran homelessness is down 6%. There's been a lot of efforts to reduce veteran homelessness. I think the biggest thing that makes a difference, Mayor Garcetti was talking about a right to housing. We have a lot more resources to house veterans than we do any other population. The investment in the VASH program, Social Services for Veterans Families, SSVF, these resources make a huge difference, and there's a much higher ratio of housing resources for veterans. And so we have the resources, and when we have the resources, we can get folks off the streets. And the VA has been a great partner, and all of our organizations that serve veterans have been fantastic partners.
Can you talk about homelessness to go up next year because of private unity ending, families aren't taking PhDs, presumably the issues with the owner concert might be solved so that you can more accurately count these families?
I think only time will tell, right? I think what we're wanting to just show is she said, come to the mic. Yes. I think only time will tell. What we're hoping is that the investments will continue and we can see, I mean, like the mayor pointed out, like we've seen a flattening of the curve. We want to bend that curve, right? So the programs that are in place need to continue in order to ensure that those individuals who are currently housed remain housed, but we've got to get them moving out of the temporary option into a more permanent option. So this is where the call to the community comes into play. We need landlords, we need additional resources, right? So that we can make sure that that curve stays low. But again, we don't know, right? And only time will tell.
Can the mayor come back to the mic and talk about this, your legacy on this issue? This is your last homeless count. I gotta think you saw that 1.5% being so close to leveling off.
Right.
I mean, what was your reaction, that gut reaction to that number?
Well, I mean, the gut is we always want to see like a double-digit decrease. Like that's the day we all long for, and I don't think to the earlier question that it's that far off, because even next year, and you're right, we're zealous about guarding HomeKey and telling the governor and legislature do more each year, and they've actually stepped up to those calls when this is only going to be for a year. Well, we got 2. Remember, I led the big city mayors to get the state to fund big cities on homelessness, period, under Governor Brown. And the governor Governor Newsom talked about that history when we were together just a couple weeks ago. I think we're on the verge of seeing that bending. I really do. 2,000 plus units next year are coming that are permanent units. We've never experienced that 2 years in a row, and 1,900 of the 2,400 this year, just in the second half of this year. Like, that can't not have an impact. It's a strange thing, too, having done this for 2 decades and worked on it long before that. When the economy has a downturn, homelessness usually goes down, and when the economy goes up, it goes up, which is counterintuitive. But when the economy goes up, it means a lot more jobs come in and rents go even higher. If there's some leveling off of rents, it might actually be a market force that helps us get more people and landlords be more willing to rent to people with vouchers and help people on the verge of homelessness not become homeless. I also think there's new mental health resources, but we're fighting other headwinds. I mean, we have to talk about these things very honestly. What's causing more of the traumas out there is a level of drug abuse we haven't seen in a long time, and the type of drug that's being used is having we have to take this medically and treat it medically, not criminalize it. I mean, that's not what I'm calling for, but the deinstitutionalizing without any plans, and our institutionalizing was prisons before, which was no solution. We will also have to, I know I'm not giving you a soundbite, but I'm trying to explain, we're gonna have to be very serious about that right to mental health care and building it up. And I know the county is struggling. They have the resources, but they can't find, like all of us, enough people to work, and that's why that article is so important. We want people who are considering what career to have join us in mental health, because we need you and you can make a huge difference. But it's our collective legacy of much more than 9 years. It's 40 years, 50 years of leading up to this moment, so that it was kind of the perfect storm. When the economy took off, rents got higher, when we didn't have enough housing for folks, and the mental health and traumas from veterans coming home from war. I mean, you asked about veterans. Who asked about veterans? You asked about veterans. Veterans, we actually, in the city of LA, we've knocked down veterans homelessness by, I think, 3/4 by the time since I've been mayor. So it showed when you have the federal, and that was because VASH vouchers, the federal government said, we will end veteran homelessness, Michelle Obama. So it shows the federal government, if you actually want to do this, you can end homelessness. There's tents, block away from the White House under President Trump and President Biden. It's not just here in LA. It's not, as I said, just Democratic-run cities. I'll give you the list of Republican-run cities where it's just as bad or worse proportionally. But I do think we are inevitably in a good place this year, but a good place shouldn't be defined by a 10 or 20% reduction in the next couple of years when we've seen a doubling. It has to be much, much more serious than that.
As a follow-up to that, are you satisfied with the amount of permanent housing that has come online during your time as mayor, especially pushing for HHH?
I'm satisfied with HHH, what we promised voters, because we're going to be 2 years early, 1,000 units more, and about 15,000 less per unit of subsidy than what we promised. But am I satisfied? Of course not. I'm voracious. I would love to see 10 times that level of permanent supportive housing. And there's other things that weren't in this press conference, but for instance, just changing the zoning around transit areas. That is, a lot of people don't know this, but it's creating, I think, let me double check the stats, 3 times more affordable housing than what we subsidize without a single dollar, because we essentially say you want to build high, you can build higher, but on your own dime, developer, you have to build affordable housing. And in the past, they do the least affordable of affordable. We made it better and better the lower you went. So we're getting extremely low-income housing, which is very good for people who are unhoused for the first time in numbers from the marketplace that we've never seen, too. So, no, I'll never be satisfied, both as a private citizen or a mayor, until we have adequate supply, or, as I think I've said, some sort of federal program that makes universal housing vouchers that are of the marketplace price. Those are the only two ways out.
Mayor, you mentioned that that the car is finally on the right track.
Yep.
But that said, also the impatience from residents, from voters,
From me.
seems to be growing at this moment. So what would your advice be to city and county leaders going forward, especially the LA mayor, as to how you balance showing results to residents and kind of managing the anger around what they're saying?
It's a great question. Something that's more qualitative, you can give a quantitative answer to, but more qualitative that doesn't land in a count like this is what we've learned, I think, in the last year or two about being much more effective about taking people from encampments to housing. Think about Echo Park, think about Venice Beach, think about MacArthur Park, some of the most, think about the Civic Center. It's never going to be 100%, doesn't stay 100% always, you have to stay on top of it. But it's so dramatically better and different. In some of those places, there's no longer encampments at all. And there's certainly a thinning out of encampments because of a strategy, I think, that we've all developed collectively that we know works. And it's, I think, that level we can't pour too much into. While we're building the permanent stuff that we need to have behind that and the preventative stuff we have to have before, we need to continue that momentum of really aligning resources, which we were able to do with Room Key and some other things, getting good agencies that can take people from a hotel to real housing and not just back onto the street. But if you look at that, those are huge victories, and nobody knew how to do those. It was like getting so overwhelming, nobody knew how do you go to a place where there's 150 people encamped and solve it, and neighbors rightfully so. How can this go? So you could do it one person at a time. Or read the article about the caseload of a county psychiatrist versus the count that we have here today, and the top person has 200 to 300 patients over 10 years versus 50,000, of which probably half have some sort of trauma that needs to be treated. There's not the allocation of resources. So I'd like to see LAHSA's evolution move more towards that too. I think LAHSA, a lot of people always throw bricks and arrows at LAHSA. It's easy to do. We are LAHSA. And they also throw bricks and stones at the politicians. Well, we are collectively either succeeding or failing when it comes to homelessness. So we need to be able to not be ideologues of saying never talk to anybody on the street, never touch them, never have any limits to how long or where they can be. But on the flip side, you cannot push this from place to place, and you cannot clean your way out of homelessness, and you cannot arrest your way out of homelessness. You have to have these strategies that now actually do work. And if you want to ever do follow-up on that, I'm more than happy to point that, because I don't know there's been enough coverage. There's been some excellent coverage. It's not a criticism of the press, but really that's where the war is being waged, at that street level model of figuring out not just one person at a time over a year and counting that as a victory, but dozens of people. And Wendy and I were just talking about this. It's still bad out there, but it is better. I drive through the city. I have a hair trigger on these things of where I see tents, and there's a lot of places that had a lot more tents, and there are fewer. Now, that's not to say to somebody who has somebody who's going to the bathroom outside their street, who's experiencing trauma, or has still 5 tents outside their house, or a place where it hasn't gotten better, that doesn't stink and that it's not horrible. It is. And I have that same sense of outrage. But we have to have that patience, that engagement, and we have to fund it, and we have to build on what works. That's the car metaphor, not just take it apart.
Get folks to get behind more funding, to get behind more resources when they're not seeing visibly those results.
But my point is, you can see plenty of places where there isn't, but there are plenty of places to see those results. And I would take people to those places and say, look, if you want more of this, we need to do this more often. And we've done that, by the way. We've done that with a lot of communities where we've been able to show folks. And we have a lot of those voices. I mean, you can find them yourselves, of places where people have experienced that, seen that, and are relieved that that works. Let's focus and highlight and put the light on with the things that are working, rather than saying nothing works. If nothing works, I'll be a private citizen as mad as I am as mayor, but we'll all just be sitting around saying, well, I guess homelessness is not something you can solve. I don't believe that.
Last one.
Oh, sorry. Christine, you're going to go to the very end. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Mayor. So, I can already hear the comments, when you talk about flattening the curve, when you talk about saying we're in a good place, you're going to have residents.
Oh, I don't want to say those two things. We're flattening the curve. We're not in a good place, and I don't think I ever said that.
But about flattening the curve and about a positive view of these numbers. You're going to have people sitting at home who say, my neighborhood's been taken over by tents. I just did a story where a school is in jeopardy of closing down. So there's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to believe these numbers, who are going to think that it's somehow skewed or that there's politics behind it. I mean, I can see the comments already on the story that we'll post online tonight. So what do you say to the people who say, no, we still have a growing problem, it's getting worse, not better, and I don't believe these numbers?
A couple of things. First of all, it is difficult to believe numbers because I think year to year it feels like apples and oranges and dragon fruit, bananas, like the methodology changes. I mean, the governor said as much. He's been taking homeless counts for many years as the mayor of San Francisco, and you always have to look at them with a grain of salt because it's a point in time. That doesn't mean that's what it is today. So you can say these numbers are false either direction potentially, or not false, they're inaccurate. They're very honest numbers. They're honestly counted. The data scientists are honest people. We don't have any role. We would love to see better numbers. If we did, I'd be standing in front of you saying, hey, it's 30% down. Like, politicians have no role in this. We're given these numbers by the professionals who make these counts and the volunteers who step out. Second is, I would say I completely 100% agree with them. I share that outrage every day. It's on my street. I see it down the block. I work on that every single day. But the question for all of us, not just for them, is, okay, then what? Then what? Is there a fantasy? Like, I've heard every suggestion. Can't we put everybody up in Palmdale? Can't we just arrest everybody and reincarcerate them? Can we get a cruise ship off the coast and put people in there? And a lot of the suggestions, the good ones, can't we do tiny home villages? Can't we get more shelters? Can't we pop them up quicker? Can't we get hotels and motels? Those are the things we're actually doing. And you can look at them and say they're not working, or you can visit them and see what is working and say we need more. I think that's the only option. We cannot retreat from serving people. We cannot retreat from building things. And I'm not interested in whether people think there's a sugarcoating or not. I'm interested in engaging people to help support that. And to your point, when it comes before voters and stuff, I actually think they've been remarkable. I don't think they're tiring of this. I think the attention is more and more. It's become a bigger and bigger issue. And why else? I'm not running any of these campaigns, but the two gambling measures, why would they pretend that they're both homeless measures? Clearly people want to vote for homeless things. That's the only way they're going to try to sneak some gambling into this country, into this state. So I'm confident that voters will, but I share their impatience. It's my role, just like them, to be the watchdog of this money. And that's why, to your point on HHH and other things, I've watched it like a hawk. And that's not a lie. It's not a politician's spin to say 1,000 more units, 15,000 less per unit, and 2 years earlier. But what I will say, as somebody who won't be mayor, is in 2 years you won't have any money left from that. What are we going to do then? So those are the sorts of harder truths than just complaining about it. As I said, some people have said when I've built something, well, you won't even be mayor then. I said, trust me, in a few months I'll be something worse. I'll be a constituent. And I'll share that same outrage that has guided every single day that I've been your mayor. Go to the places where things have gotten better, and I agree with you. If it's bad where you are, that's your only truth. It's like saying the years that crime went down, if you're a victim of crime, who cares, right? You're a victim of crime. So I'm very sympathetic to that, and I want to continue to hear those voices, work with those folks, and engage them in positive ways forward, not just complaining.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, ladies and
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.